Hey, this is your general speaking. The day after we recorded 2 weeks worth of Poets at War, I am trying to get these things together and all scheduled and stuff before the G3 conference where I will be working. And as a result, I do not have a whole lot of time to make all the fancy graphics and everything else that's going on. And these are going to be very basic screen recording podcasts visually. I am going to try and put in all the audio stuff. You guys know the drill. 7.5, probably 8 minutes in, whatever the case may be, is when the podcast starts after the long intro. And let's get into it. This is Poets at War.
Once there were 4 children, whose names were Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy.
Suppose I'm writing a novel. I write, Mary laid down her book. Next moment came a knock at the door. For Mary, who's got to live in the imaginary time of the story, there's no interval between putting down the book and hearing the knock. But I, her creator, between writing the first part of that sentence and the second, may have gone out for an hour's walk and spent the whole hour thinking about Mary.
We make things by the law in which we are made. We create because we are created.
In a hole in the ground, there lived a hobbit.
One ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all, in the darkness bind them.
Tolkien and Lewis, both in their way, lifted me out of this world to show me a thundering beauty. And when I read the last sentence and came tumbling back to earth, I could still hear the peal. I hear it to this day. God allowed those stories to lift the veil on the imaginary world to show me the real world behind it, which ended up being, in the end, the one I was already in. The real world, at least in part, isn't out there somewhere, nor is it in my mind. It's here, right under my feet, all around me. Tolkien and Lewis held the fabric of Narnia or Middle-earth in one hand and clutched our world in the other, building a bridge across which we could set out for perilous realms, and yet return safely with some of the beauty we found there.
My first and last philosophy, that which I believe in with unbroken certainty, I learnt in the nursery. I generally learnt it from a nurse, that is, from the solemn and star-appointed priestess at once of democracy and tradition. The things I believed most then, the things I believe most now, are the things called fairy tales.
We live in a moment that's unlike any other moment, a moment of bizarre tyranny, a moment of overreach.
I was nearly torn apart by a crazy doctor.
A moment of fear. It's like, and how are we living? How are we standing up in this moment?
I was made asleep by a bunch of mangy pirates.
Are we full of joy? Like, are we characters who are full of joy and unafraid?
And eaten, got that? Eaten by a fire-breathing dragon. And not to mention being tossed, squashed, and scared practically to death.
It's like, how do we image God in this particular narrative in which we've been placed, in this chapter? And we get trained for that by reading about Sam and Frodo and Aragorn and Gandalf, and reading, Charlotte's Web and Animal Farm, and reading about Prince Caspian. Like, when you're little, you read those things, and you read stories when you're older, and it reinforces what is the courageous action of a character in this moment.
Yet you stand before me.
Well, yeah.
Think, boy. What kind of an adventure would you have had if I brought you here with a turn of the page?
I wept bitterly, and then I said to myself, when everything happens quite miserably, then He sends help. I have always read so. People must first of all suffer a great deal before they can bring anything to accomplishment.
God, who at various times and in various ways spoke in time past to the fathers by the prophets, has in these last days spoken to us by His Son, whom He has appointed heir of all things, through whom also He made the worlds.
For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us. For the earnest expectation of the creation eagerly waits for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of Him who subjected it in hope. Because the creation itself also will be delivered from the bondage of corruption into the glorious liberty of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation groans and labors with birth pangs together until now. Not only that, but we also who have the first fruits of the Spirit, even we ourselves, groan within ourselves, eagerly waiting for the adoption, the redemption of our body.
Minstrel boy to the war is gone. In the ranks of death you'll find him. His father's sword he had girded on, and his wild harp slung behind him. God of song, said the warrior bard, though all the world betray thee, one sword at least thy right shall guard, one faithful harp shall praise thee. The minstrel fell, but the foeman's chain could not bring that proud soul under. The harp he loved ne'er spoke again, for he tore its cords asunder, and said, no chain shall sully thee, thou soul of love and bravery. Thy songs were made for the pure and free, they shall never sound in slavery. The chains upon the people came, and they gave away their freedom. No prophets left, they then grew lame, they accepted their false kingdom. But one young man saw the minstrel boy, and he took up the shredded strings, and with great love remade with joy the sacred tool for truth to sing.
As I already said, the Apple event was today, which was
What'd they talk about?
super cool.
Let's talk about that a little bit. What'd they talk about? Because I have not seen it yet.
Well, they launched the new iPhones,
Mhm.
and the new Apple Watch, and the new Apple Watch Ultra.
Okay. All stuff that I'm
And
not in the ecosystem for, but that's cool.
yeah, the big thing is that iPhones now have USB-C.
Oh, good. Finally.
So, finally, I disagree with the
yes,
with the,
of course. The way they
what is
went
it?
about getting it, yeah.
Yeah,
European,
completely
well, it was European
uni-
Union and a few other things. Yeah.
yeah, European Union saying you have to have USB-C on your devices.
Mm-hmm.
I think that that's a bad thing, and I don't think that they should have the power to do that.
Right. Same.
But I'm really glad that we're getting USB-C on the iPhone.
Agreed.
I have
Agreed.
I have a 5-year-old phone that I got whenever it was a year old, like brand new whenever it was a year old, 10R, the iPhone 10R.
Yeah.
And I told myself whenever I got it, I am not upgrading until they put USB-C on the iPhone.
There you go.
We thought it was a year away at that point in time.
Right, right.
So yeah, now I just need to do that with this phone and say, well, I'm not upgrading until micro LED or something like that.
There you go. Yep, that'll be good. Well, glad to hear all that went well. So, you guys ready for the Procreate news? Have you looked at it, Brendan?
I saw it. I skimmed over it, but
Okay.
it'll do. But I'm a verbal processor and an auditory learner, so help me out here.
Okay. So here's the thing. You guys are familiar with Procreate, the app itself, right? It's like a Photoshop sort of thing with a lot of Apple Pencil integration for the iPad. Okay.
Great.
Sure. Yeah.
It's really good. I use it all the time in my art, touching up AI art and even creating stuff for AI art to process, and other sorts of things like that. And basically all my graphics editing is now done through Procreate. I take the extra step of transferring it to my iPad through AirDrop or whatever else in order to edit with an Apple Pencil, just because it's the easiest way to edit. It's just the most intuitive. They have a great piece of software. Anyway, this new app that they're coming out with is called Procreate Dreams. And I've only really been looking into it today. They had a 30-minute keynote at an event in London, because they're based out of London. And my goodness, it's exciting. There was several demos that they showed from both professionals and hobbyists that they got to do stuff, and essentially it is taking all the stuff that's already in Procreate and then adding in not just keyframing animation, but frame by frame animation, etc., etc. But then it has a few features that are particularly amazing. And the craziest things about it, when you want to talk about like big, oh my goodness, wow stuff, they're largest canvas size, with, you know, taking advantage of the iPad software and the optimization that's been happening over the last few years, is 1,000,000 pixels by 1,000,000 pixels. Yeah, absolutely.
Gee.
Yeah. Exactly.
Is that limited to the M2? Like the M2
they have
12.9?
not said specifically, but they are trying to work as much as they can into this stuff. 16K is what is Procreate's upper limit. And they're going to be moving that to original Procreate as well. But that's just insane to begin with. They are, you got to see a lot of their features. One of their features has been, I've been asking for on all kinds of animation software for a long time, is what they're calling Perform, which is basically, you have your loop, basically your timeline, however far you pinch, it will loop as you press play, and you can see the animation play out. Perform allows you to hit record, and as soon as you start moving whatever object you have focused on, it keyframes based on how you move it automatically. So essentially you're puppeteering whatever object you have control over, right? So if you have a full person, let's say you got a person waving like this, no, right? Then you got this sort of thing going on. What you can do is first do the raise of the arm and hit record and do the raise of the arm. Then you can hit record again and have it go like this, bring up to one finger, right? Then you can do that and then add in the side-to-side motion, right? And then you can do a record again and add in the finger waggle movement, right? So essentially you can focus on all these different little pieces and puppeteer them in real time to the timeline, and then tweak that even further, you know, later on if you want to get it just perfect. Which go ahead.
I think Blender might already have something like that, but I haven't I haven't dug deep enough. It's just what you're talking about sounds familiar.
Right.
It might. I'm saying is it might exist. It might not.
It exists in some other forms, but Procreate is particularly good at creating UI that's friendly. Another thing is if you're hitting play on the timeline and like I said, the timeline will loop, you know, depending on how far zoomed in on it you are. If you're playing, you can actually zoom out and it will fix the loop and just keep going, right? You can also pull the timeline down so that you just have the canvas, and it turns into flipbook view, where you have a little flipbook guy over here where you can go back and forth between your recent frames or whatever. And so you can draw, flip to the next one, draw, flip to the next one, you know, et cetera, and it has onion skinning. It has all that other kind of stuff. Yeah, it's everything I've ever wanted in animation software in a UI that is basically as easy as Procreate. And there are I'm talking like on the high end level, the professional level, I might as well show you guys and get your reaction to it. There's a, let me see if I can find it. There is an animation that was done by a professional animator named Aaron Blaze, I believe. Yeah, Aaron Blaze. I'll get you the link here in the, I'll do it in the host chat here. And let me do this. I'll go ahead and show it on the, because it's only like 2 minutes. I'll show it on the podcast as well.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So that was like a month and a half of work between 3 people.
Wow.
Yeah. That's pretty high level animation. I mean, it's not like fully completed Disney, but like that's something you could have seen on a well-to-do direct to video back in the 90s. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
Like going up and actually getting a market share against Disney. You know what I'm saying? Like, so I'm very, very impressed with everything that they've got, and I highly recommend looking at the watching the 30-minute keynote to talk about all the other crazy features they have, and the fact that what you just saw was done on an iPad with 3 people.
Yep.
Absolutely mind-blowing.
And in a month.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, imagine the productivity you could have if you give them, a year and a half.
Right.
I mean,
you still need
film
extra
development
time for
cycle.
Right, exactly.
With a full team of how much is an animation team?
Right.
50 50 full-time people.
And they all have iPads.
Is that right?
Yep, and can work in the cloud on the same project.
You could.
Just saying, Brendan, your animation
that...
studio might be closer than you think it is. Not just this, but other things too.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, though. Like, it depends. This sounds like it's limited to 2D animation.
Yes, because
Right
Procreate
now?
is a 2D situation. Yes, Procreate's a 2D situation.
So
regardless,
right.
the fact is you can make 2D look 3D like you did with Klaus, and that sort of a thing. And yes, you can add other tools to this.
Totally.
You can do a 2.5D
like
easily.
the mixture, the fact of the matter. Oh yeah. The mixture of 2 and 3D is not a brain fart. Mixture of 2 and 3D is a common thing. That's basically what it comes down to. Klaus kind of is the first one that I know of that did it, but a lot of video games have been, especially video games that have an anime-inspired art style, video games are entirely 3D practically,
right?
Except for Sprite, but they've been. Oh gosh, what are the guys who did Blaze Blue?
Sure.
Anyway, the people have been blending 2 and 3D for ages. Arcane is the most recent one that I know of, that I know what they did to get it. So, yeah, it's just a question of workflow, and yeah, it's possible to do that. I think that like the fact that it's on the iPad is both impressive and concerning to me, because of, like, from an impressive standpoint, it's like, okay, yes, cool. The fact that you have a machine and software that are integrated together well enough that you can run it is great. My concern becomes when inevitably there is a disconnect between the hardware and the software, right? In order to keep up with the software, we're going to have to buy the improved hardware over time, which they're a company.
That happens
of course
with
they're going
everything.
to bring it
Right,
back.
right.
Yeah, and that's true of everything, right? You know, that's my point. It is true of everything. I just wonder about the timeline of like, how often will I need to upgrade my iPad if I get one?
That's pretty low and has been pretty low because both I didn't tell you guys one of the best parts. This software is $20 one-time purchase.
Yes, I saw that.
$20 one-time purchase is huge.
Yeah, absolutely huge. Yeah. So
holy shnikes.
Yeah,
really good.
Yeah. And Procreate, they've been committed to their development on Apple's stuff for a long time, and Apple's thrown money at them because they did so well with Procreate. So basically, like, Apple's whole philosophy has so far, over the 9 years that Procreate has been around, very much bled into their like minimal UI mixed with some other sorts of things. What are you looking for? Okay, there you go. Minimal UI mixed with what's the other term? Not having to upgrade as much on a lot of these things, because Procreate was initially for all the top level iPads 9 years ago, and it still works on all the iPads from 9 years ago, plus all the lower end iPads now. It's not just an iPad Pro thing, and they've made it clear that they've been working on this one for 5 years before they ever announced it. And so they made it clear that they are trying to get as many of the features as they possibly can across all iPads regardless. Which the ones that they have on the low end now are like, they're A chips, they're not the M chips, and they don't have any extra video RAM or anything else like that. They might not be able to get the million by million pixels, but it'll at least still be 16K.
Oh, assuredly they won't.
And animate the same way. And so, you know, it might be a little bit slower on that situation, but they're going to give it to you anyway, you know? So, yeah.
So is Procreate Dreams like the next Procreate, or is it purely animation?
It's Procreate. It's a
secondary app.
It's a second app, but it has Procreate baked into it.
Okay.
So it has all the functionality of Procreate. Yes, it has all the functionality of the brushes and all the rest that
you don't have to get to it. So you don't have to get both. You can just get Procreate Dreams.
Right. If you want just Procreate because you're a graphic designer and whatever else, you don't have to deal with all the animation stuff. But yeah, you can, I mean, obviously, and you can edit video and audio and whatever else in it too. It has all those extra effects. They were showing some really cool situations with like a multiplane that they set up in layers where they would have things, have timed Gaussian blurs when you were coming in and out like this to give the perspective, you know, situation. And basically any effect that you can do in a video editor, you can do in Procreate Dreams alongside all the other animation stuff that you would have with keyframing and all the other fun stuff. So you can do hand drawn, you can do keyframe, you can do a combination of, you can do, basically you could skin the cat however you want in a 2D environment And yeah, they were showing how you can bring in video and do like, like you'd see in some of the commercials on Arthur and stuff back in the 90s, like people jumping on the ground is like, hey Tony, and like you see the white lines come out, when they hit the ground or whatever. Like, so that like that you can animate to video, you can do whatever, you can render out something in video and composite it in through green screen, you can do all those sorts of things. And so yeah, it's exciting. I'm really excited
super
about
cool.
it. Yeah, I'm really excited about it. So yeah, I just wanted to get you guys at least a little hyped, at least hyped enough to watch the 30-minute keynote at some point, because it's it's impressive. But yeah,
I'm always down for watching a keynote.
I know you are. One day you're gonna give a keynote. I had a dream about you the other night. Have you ever seen The Office?
No, I haven't.
Okay. There's this scene in The Office, and I almost want to just show it to you right now, but I'm not gonna. You can see it another time. It's fine. But basically, they have this kid who's like been a temp in the office off and on for years, and he's basically there was a new boss. The paper company merged with a company that's making a tablet, and they're trying to get in on this. Was like when Apple was really getting big and whatever else, iPhone 4, iPhone 5 kind of stuff. Anyway, they just held their own keynote in their own first brick and mortar store. It was called Saber, and they made the pyramid. It was a triangle shaped tablet. And so basically, like, Ryan is supposed to give this keynote, and he runs off because he's just terrified of going out in front of people. And they give it to Jim, who's this other guy who's he's just mortified by going out there anyway, but like he's gonna lose his job if he doesn't, because the temp has already lost his, and he has to wear wear Ryan's clothes, and Ryan's like way smaller, and it's like a Dr. Evil costume. It's the weirdest thing, and like the tablet gets lowered down on a wire, and he's like supposed to be like it's just really over the top production, and he's like, the future is here, and he's delivering it with no his clothes are too small. You can see some of his midriff. He's just like, and he's just trying to deliver this thing as best as he can, and he just has no enthusiasm. And it's in this tiny little brick and mortar store, and they're trying to do this big production. And I was just like, I could totally see Alex doing this one day.
Oh no, please no.
You got the personality for keynoting. With
less mistakes.
Yes, with way less mistakes and far more enthusiasm.
Oh, thank you.
But yes. Yes. So, anyway, we can move on to other stuff, but I definitely wanted to bring that up to you guys because it has me, like, I'm holding back quite a bit on how excited I am just for my own stuff this is.
Oh, yeah.
And how much I'm excited about the potential for other animation products to follow suit, and for Brendan to get his animation studio and Yonder Child to be part of that, and blah 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 all down the line. And I'm just like, yes, lots of work, but it's good work, and we can do it.
Yes.
So
well,
yes.
Do you remember that Patrick H. Willems video that I sent you on AI filmmaking?
Which one was that? Was that the positive or the negative?
The negative.
Okay, the
one.
negative. Yes.
Yeah. Remember the point that he made that I said that I thought was the strongest point in the video is that the democratization of filmmaking isn't AI, it was cheap filmmaking equipment?
Yes.
This feels like the democratization of animation.
Yes. And AI is part of the
so cool.
The design function of the whole thing. Yeah. AI is going to be far more in the design area than it is going to be in any kind of finalization. I've always said that.
Well, yes and no, because we already have AI. I mean, you're talking about generative AI, but
yes.
Which is technically different.
Yes.
Yeah. But we already have some of that within animation already. If you've looked at what Corridor Digital has put out,
right?
Yeah.
So, but the AI wasn't the function of finishing; it was still the function of designing.
Mm-hmm.
Was it? I thought they were handling a lot of the in-betweens, the parts of the animation that were not that are parts that people don't like to do, which is
They
why
used-
3D splining became so
They
popular.
they used non-generative AI to smooth the tweens, but all frames
okay,
were
there it is.
generated.
Yeah.
All frames were generated by AI, and then problem frames fixed in graphic editors.
There you go. Okay.
Okay, so yeah. Anyway,
Yes.
but yeah, so exciting stuff. And that sounded absolutely nerdy to everyone else who knows nothing about animation. But hey, we're here for nerding out, if nothing else. Let's be honest.
Our tens and tens of viewers will understand.
The tens and tens of viewers. Yep.
Yep. So stay tuned for more on Poets at War.
Attention all Christian writers and creative peoples! Are you searching for a place to share your work and receive encouragement from fellow wordsmiths? Look no further than the Broodcast. Inspired by the legendary Inklings of old, a group of writers who banded together during the Second Great War. The Broodcast is your monthly gathering for inspiration, fellowship, and critique. Join us as we share our stories and support our fellow soldiers on our creative missions. Enlist in the Broodcast community today at joshuadavidling.com/brood. Travel cyberspace. Serve the greatest cause. Join the ranks of the Brood today.
Imagine if you had everything Tolkien ever wrote. Well, you can't have his, but you can have mine. The Ling Lyricanium is $10 a month, and you can find it at joshuadavidling.com/LL. That's joshuadavidling.com/LL.
Hello, I'm Sarah Levesque, Editor-in-Chief of Logo Sophia magazine. I would like to invite you to explore our Pilgrim's Journal of Life, Love, and Literature, both in visual format and in podcast format. Our goal is to help bridge the gaps between different Christian denominations and traditions. Please visit our website at logosophiamag.com to read or listen to stories, articles, poetry, and more, all for free. We look forward to journeying with you.
So,
Me transitioning into Sleeping Beauty.
what research did y'all do for this one?
I watched the original.
You watched the original?
I watched the original too.
The original Disney.
Yay.
Fun.
The original Disney.
Cool.
Yeah, not that I did not somehow go back and watch the original, whatever, Italian, German.
I was gonna say
I did not invent a time machine and stare over the shoulder of the guy who was writing it.
Okay, good.
I watched the Disney version.
Because that might be a bit. Oh goodness. Am I the only one who did the previous research on this one?
Mm-hmm.
I vaguely remember some things about Sleeping Beauty, and
we're in for a rough one. And I am
you
actually
get
going to
shock
throw
and
down.
disturb us.
Well, I am actually going to throw down. If you're listening with your kids, what does Chuck, all the various executive producers say on this episode of Adventures in Odyssey? They don't say very special, but they come close to saying, listener discretion advised.
Viewer and listener discretion is advised.
Yes,
Let's just go with that.
Yeah, we'll go with that. So this is. To me, I don't think, and we may find differently because I haven't researched all these fairy tales, but I think that this one is probably the one that I talk a little bit about this with Alex on another day. This is the one that everyone's fully and completely embarrassed about when it comes to fairy tales. This is the thing that makes people like Boltman want to demythologize the world. Because this story... I'm not coming at it with a hot take in the vein of like, I think it's bad, because there's a lot more to it under the surface that people don't go far enough. But when it comes to objectionable content, this is the one. But we might as well start out with the Disney stuff, get that kind of out of the way before we go further back. This is talk about the stuff people are familiar with, and then dive back into the craziness, and I can bring you my insane ramblings of my general consensus after all this mess. So what are your guys' thoughts on Sleeping Beauty, the movie Disney version, and what do you like, what do you dislike?
This one moved a lot faster than Cinderella did.
Yeah.
Like this one feels like it actually has a pretty modern pace to it.
For the
Whereas
most
Cinderella
part.
seemed a fair fair bit more slow than we're generally used to.
Movie, my hot take: the movie is not named after the protagonist.
Correct, it is not.
The protagonists are the fairies.
Yes, they are.
Because they're the ones who are doing everything. Also, Merryweather is best fairy. Fight me.
Make it blue.
Also, Casey is basically Merryweather.
Yeah, I can see that. She is the one who has the most common sense out of all three of them.
Yep.
And like she's shown as sort of like the youngest, the one that the others kind of like are, and she's the most like impulsive and gung ho and like short tempered and stuff.
He's also the one that totally would have told Sleeping Beauty about, or would have told Aurora about, you know, the entire curse thing, because she wanted to keep using the wands. So if she had actually gone and done that, then she would have known. Oh yeah, don't touch the thing.
Well, in fairness, I'm pretty sure that Maleficent was like mind controlling her.
Oh yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Point. So she still would have touched the thing, but
yeah. But she would have at least not been. What is this crazy contraption here? So.
Yeah.
No. Unfortunately, Sleeping Beauty does suffer from being an idiot plot.
Yes, it does.
But
you have to have some idiocy in your story, or everything works out way too fast.
Right, but there's even more so here. Like I get the wanting to protect the child, but come on.
Yeah.
We're talking about their life.
It's like Frozen, but not as bad.
So let me ask you this: do we give it points for or against? Okay. Do we give it points for or against for being a jukebox musical?
Oh dear, I hate jukebox musicals, and I hadn't thought of it like that. I'm not taking points away from it because it's jukeboxing.
I mean, it's great music. Yeah, it's the ballet.
Yeah, it's jukeboxing of ballet, so it doesn't count.
Yeah, okay.
By jukebox, what do you mean by jukebox musical?
Oh, he doesn't know the
jukebox
term.
musicals would be whenever you have a musical. Are you familiar with Moulin Rouge at all?
Yeah, sort of.
Where they basically just play popular songs as
they sing
points in the
popular
plot.
songs as points in the plot.
Yeah. Oh. It's a jukebox. Pitch Perfect would be another jukebox musical where they just go through and sing popular songs, and that's the thing. That's the plot of the movie. Just throwing a bunch of songs together to create a plot. Technically, this uses the pre-established music of Tchaikovsky's ballet as the soundtrack. It's rearranged, but it's Tchaikovsky's music.
Did you not know that?
Once Upon a Dream the melody was originally Tchaikovsky?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, interesting. Didn't know that.
Okay, well now you do.
Now I do. Today I learned.
Yep. So I was asking if you took
all that to say. Yeah. No, I do not take points away from that.
Yeah, it's not. We're not talking Tarzan here with Phil Collins, although I would argue that Phil Collins writing the music for Tarzan doesn't necessarily make it jukebox, but
right, yes,
anyway,
yes.
It rides the line
with Tarzan. Okay, fight me.
Tarzan's fun. I'm not saying it's great, but it's fun. Anyway.
Yeah. No, I think Once Upon a Dream is a great song, and they did a great job with that. I think that I find it funny that Prince Philip, the first thing he does is he looks at Aurora and he goes, yeah, when he's a baby, he's a kid. And that establishes that that was what I was thinking. Shakespeare. It's a Shakespeare plot.
Yes.
It's a Shakespeare plot because no one recognizes each other and they end up doing what they're supposed to doing anyway.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was amusing. To me, it felt very Shakespearean to me as from a plot perspective.
I hadn't put those two together, but yeah, you're right.
One moment, y'all.
We don't have any scenarios where there's a man playing a woman playing a man playing a woman, but but it is the fact that it is, you've got well, let's go through Shakespeare. What was it? Midsummer Night's Dream, where you have Oberon and fairies and things like that. You've got fairies in this. You've got a wedding that's supposed to happen, but the kids don't want to participate. That seems fairly, you've got people not recognizing each other for who they are. That's a very Shakespearean thing.
When we get to non-Disney princesses, I need to show you the Swan Princess, because I think neither of you have seen that, if I remember correctly. And they do this point, the point of two kids growing up betrothed and not liking each other, in an amazing way. And remember we were talking about Greatest Showman recently, Alex, with A Million Dreams being one of the best storytelling musical numbers around. I would argue the Swan Princess's song, This Is My Idea, which actually goes through their entire childhood until they start to like each other, as a musical number back and forth, is absolutely fantastic. But anyway.
What movie is this?
The Swan Princess. I'll look up the date. It's in the 90s.
Oh, yeah, this is that one...
1994. So you have seen it.
This is that one, like, off-Disney one.
It is one of the off-Disney ones, yes. I would argue it's one of the best off-Disney ones that's not Bluth either. So, anyway, but we'll get to that eventually. So, yeah. Philip is awesome. Swordy sword, smashy smash. Killing dragons.
Philip has some great character.
The kings going back and forth is really funny and very Shakespearean.
We should
like,
get
it's not Shakespearean dialogue, but it's very much, you can imagine Shakespeare writing the back and forth between the two kings arguing about this stuff, jumping in, trying to kill each other, and then being friends again. It's a Shakespeare comedy.
If I was ever at a theology podcast and just had a bag of gold I could just drop in their lap for a request, I would have them sing Scumps or whatever the song is. The three of them doing it. Yeah, they've got the same energy as those kings.
They do.
Oh man. No, I also remember thinking that Aurora looked evil. Just because of the like early on as a peasant girl with the angled face and the mischievous like look in her eye, just because of the way of the art style, she looked a little too sharp to be a princess in a sense for me, but I got used to it.
I have theories on that, but go ahead.
Go on.
Go ahead. Okay, this might launch us into the discussion of the previous stuff. So, in all previous variants of Sleeping Beauty that aren't too far flung, one of the main functions of the story is what do you want to call it? I have a little more leeway here than I normally do, so I don't have to think too hard. Basically don't have sex before you're married purity kind of play. That's something that happens throughout all of them. And one of the main ways that we see it in the Freudian sense in Disney's version is they take something that Grimm did and they do it up even more, is the briars around the castle. Basically the idea is the spinning wheel, phallic object, whatever, penetrates, blah, 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 all that other nonsense. And then briars come up around and it's like, I'm broken, stay away, et cetera, et cetera. And she has to be restored by a true love as opposed to a false love, blah, 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 blah. So That to me is my theory as to why she's looking somewhat promiscuous, not necessarily sexually, but mischievous, right? Sort of playful, sort of like she's like, oh, like she is of age now, and like that's part of what they did in the drawing. I think that's totally part, like something that they're trying to get across in the undertones throughout the whole thing. So as far as evil, no, but she definitely was, the way she moved especially was supposed to be fluidly sexually beautiful. I think that was part of the Nine Old Men's purpose in drawing her versus Cinderella, you know. Because it's in the DNA of the story, which we'll get into here shortly. But anyway, go ahead.
Especially the comparing her to Snow White. Snow White's facial shape is round.
Right.
Aurora's facial shape is a diamond.
Right.
Well, upside down triangle, but work with me here.
Do we have access? Like, have their notebooks ever been made public?
I don't know that they're public, but they are.
I know that you talked about Glenn Keane.
Yes.
Like having his notebooks for.
Well, he also went on exposure sheets. He wrote on his exposure sheets. Not all of them did that. So some of the stuff was taken home. A lot of stuff was, compiled and put in the archives. So you would have to ask the archivist to look, because they don't make all that public at all. But it's thoroughly possible, and they might have tapes even from the meetings, because Walt Disney did a lot of audio taped meetings with people. And they may have talked about this, the animators and everything. So
and they haven't made those public?
No, they don't want them to be public because there's a lot of stuff on there they'd rather not people know about. Anyway. Oh,
yeah,
boy.
I mean, I kind of wonder a little bit how anachronistic that is, given how rapidly our culture became sexualized over the course of even the past 20 years.
Yeah,
so
I realize that, but yeah, we also have they were the Nine Old Men. They were men. They were not little kids, and they read the stories. And like I said, we'll get to that. But go ahead.
True. And the other thing is that sexual sin has been around for thousands of years. It's been around since the dawn of time.
And like I said, this isn't promiscuous sexuality. This is not them putting sex into a Disney movie like we see today. This situation would be them trying to get the undertones of the story through in ways that would be acceptable to their audience at the time. So that's a different thing. That's like saying you take something like Macbeth and try to tone it down to be a Disney movie, right?
Or Hamlet,
so,
yeah, etc. So
hold on though. What is a briar?
Thornies.
That's a bunch of thorns together.
What was her name when she was named Aurora? What was the name that they gave her when they hid her away?
I think that's part of it too.
And what Maleficent makes when she surrounds the castle is the forest of thorns, of briars. So there's this thorniness all through, and that could lead to that wheel. Credit. But
the pricking your finger on the spinning wheel,
right? Yeah. But let's. I just came up with this idea because I took an English class or two in high school, so I can come up with BS on the spot. I wonder if naming her Briar Rose when she is pulled away from the king and queen, and the fact that Maleficent, who is the mistress of evil, who calls on the powers of hell, makes a forest of thorns. I wonder if they're connecting pulling her away from her parents with the evil of Maleficent, making a parallel there.
They could be, but both the name Briar Rose and Aurora are used in previous variants of Sleeping Beauty. So they could be playing with things that already exist.
Yeah, at
but
that
yeah.
point, that would make the most sense.
Right. Right. Yes.
Following the source material.
Right. But I'm saying they could be bending the source material into their favor because they don't come from the same variant, right? They specifically chose to use two names in this for whatever reason. So your theories hold weight too. So anyway,
yeah,
but
I would imagine that they were taking the two things that were already established and by putting them together, trying to make it say something different that they thought was unique and interesting.
Or they were using both the names to get people who have seen both of them go, know that name.
Right. Well, to defend my Freudian thing really quickly, this is one of those things where if you don't have a rigorous study of this story and where it came from, which, like I said, we're going to get into in really, really soon, I don't see how you can see it as anything but a Freudian worldview of primitive ideas of sexuality in fairy tale form as cautionary tales for little girls. I like it's that black and white when you look at it as a surface thing. And I cannot see how the Nine Old Men, at least one of them, and definitely Disney, from everything that I've read about him and his philosophies, could possibly have seen it as morally as anything but a Freudian warning against, and biblical too. Don't let love be woke before its time, etc., warning against the dangers of feminine and the power of feminine sexuality. So let's get into this, shall we? I am going to start with the most recognized early version, but there is an earlier version that we're going to get back to, and it's very important. I am going to start with the most shocking because this is the most shocking one. And then it actually got tamer as time went on. So I don't know.
Before you go into this, do you want to throw another hide your wives, hide your kids?
Sure. Hide your kids, hide your wife. Yeah, we'll go with that.
Disclaimer, viewer discretion, listener discretion is advised.
Yep. Okay, so I have no clue how to pronounce this dude's first name. Giambattista Basile, his version, comes from, he was born in 1566 and died in 1632 in Naples, Italy. This is the first version that most people think of when they think of proper, this is Sleeping Beauty. When I say that, like, this is the first version. So it's called Sun, Moon, and Talia. I'm just going to read some from the Wikipedia because they're going to get it pretty spot on. After the birth of a great lord's daughter, Talia, wise men and astrologers cast the, okay, let me give it a little more further up. Okay, that's just where it starts. It's not a greatly written article. We'll just go with it. After the birth of a great lord's daughter, Talia, wise men and astrologers cast the child's horoscope and predict that Talia would be endangered by a splinter of flax. To protect his daughter, the father commands that no flax would ever be brought into the house. Years later, Talia sees an old woman spinning flax on a spindle. She asks the woman if she can stretch the flax herself, but as soon as she begins to spin, the splinter of flax gets under her fingernail and she collapses in sleep. Unable to stand the thought of burying his daughter, Talia's father puts his daughter in one of his country estates. Sometime later, quite a bit later, a king who is out hunting in the nearby woods follows his falcon into the house. He finds Talia. Overcome by her beauty, he tries unsuccessfully to wake her, and then, crying aloud, he beheld, this is quoting from the story, crying aloud, he beheld her charms and felt his blood course hotly through his veins. He lifted her in his arms and carried her to a bed where he gathered the first fruits of love. By the way, she is confirmed dead in this story at this point. Afterwards, he leaves her on the bed and returns to his own city. Talia becomes pregnant, and in 9 months later is still in deep sleep. It doesn't say deep sleep, it says she's dead. She gives birth to twins, a boy and a girl. One day, the girl cannot find her mother's breast. Instead, she begins to suck on her finger and draws the flax splinter out. Talia awakens immediately, resurrects, and names her beloved children Sun and Moon, and lives with them in the house. The king returns to find Talia awake, revealing to her that he is the father of her twin children. The two fall in love. However, the king is already married, and one night he calls out the name of the names of Talia, Sun and Moon, in his sleep. His wife, the queen, hears him and forces the king's secretary to tell her everything, and then, using a forged message, has Talia's children brought to court. She orders the cook to kill the children and serve them to the king, but the cook hides them and goes on to cook 2 lambs instead. The queen taunts the king while he eats the meal, unaware of the cook's exchange. Then the queen brings Talia to court. She commands that a huge fire be lit in the courtyard and that Talia be thrown into the flames. Talia asks the queen to allow her to take off her fine garments first. The queen agrees. Talia undresses and utters screams of grief with each piece of clothing. The king hears Talia's screams and goes to her, where his wife tells him that Talia will be burned and that he has unknowingly eaten his own children. The king, realizing all the ruse, commands that his wife, his secretary, and the cook all be thrown into the fire instead. But the cook explains how he saved Sun and Moon and fed the king 2 lambs instead. Talia and the king marry, and the cook is promoted to royal chamberlain. The wife is thrown in the fire, blah, blah, blah. So, yeah.
Fun.
Right? So, in this version, it's very, very clear, even though the Wikipedia article doesn't say this, it's very clear she's dead. This is necrophilia, and then the babies resurrect her through pulling out the flax from her finger. Which, by the way, sucking on the finger and pulling out the flax is actually a major thing in all variants, even the oldest ones. But it's whether they're alive, dead, whatever else. I think this is the only one where she's dead, but I'm not 100% positive.
This is one of those stories where you look at Freud and you're like, you're wrong, but I can see how you got to where you did.
Right. That's my point, right? Yeah. So this one was mainly based on Perrault, though, or Perrault, however you want to pronounce it, Charles, of 1628 through 1703. In France, his version was similar. The biggest differences were okay, I may get some of this wrong, so don't blame me. It's been a little while. We didn't record when we were supposed to, but I'm gonna try and sum this up. Basically, the biggest differences on this one are, she definitely is asleep. And in that one, it's the king's. He's not married. It's like a prince. The king/prince's mother is is there instead of the wife, right? And they do a very
evil stepmother,
right? Evil stepmother kind of situation, and they do that instead. So it's very similar on a lot of the notes, but it definitely tones down a couple things. And then we have Grimm version, which they also borrow from the Brothers Grimm version. The biggest difference they make is they expand upon the, and of course German, everyone knows Brothers Grimm. They expand upon the second half, which really this kind of gets broken into 2 halves. There's the part with the mom, and then there's the part before with this actual waking of the Sleeping Beauty. And most variants have some version of the 2 stories. Their second story is expanded, and there's a whole thing with it is the prince's mother again, but the mother is an ogre and wants to eat the children herself.
Oh, okay. So yeah.
So Grendel.
Grendel, but
Yeah.
also there's variations of that in Norse and English folklore.
Brunhilde,
not specifically with this story, but with others.
Yes,
right?
yes. Absolutely. And so there's a lot of different stuff there. There's also in their version a little bit more of the kids and the mom in hiding, a little bit more story to them, which Disney pulled from for Briar Rose, and for the fairies a little bit. And so there's a bunch of different stuff connecting all those things. Briar Rose is in one of them. The name of Briar Rose, Aurora is in another one. I don't remember which ones right off the top of my head. We can look into any of those things should anyone bother. But those are the three that people mainly mention. But the one that they forget is actually part of a giant medieval French work that is when I say giant, it's an epic poem basically, part prose, part poem, and it's Arthurian from the 14th century. You're aware of this?
Yep.
Persephorist, or however it's pronounced.
No, what's his name? I can't remember. Anyway, yeah, French.
It's anonymous,
Arthurian
but
stories are huge.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
French Arthurian stories are huge. The major Arthurian legend that started all of like the Arthurian stuff that like was by a French author. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. I have the book somewhere over here.
That's one of the reasons why Tolkien didn't like Arthur as much, right? Because he wanted a mythology for
Britain specifically,
for Britain specifically, and the only discernibly British mythology was Arthur, which they stole from the French.
Right.
Yeah.
So
because the original story is called Le Mort d'Arthur. I can't remember the author's name. I've got the Romance of Arthur over there, and I should have the Death of Arthur, but I don't know where that is offhand.
So this one's called Persephorist. It was published in 1528, but it was written sometime during the 14th century. It is a widely published, I should say. It was a story in this epic of a man named Troilus and his and a princess named Zelendine. So basically, just reading from Wikipedia here, this one's very different, but it has a lot of the same elements that were later taken. This is the actual earliest version. In this tale, a princess named Zelendine falls in love with a man named Troilus. Her father sends him to perform tasks to prove himself worthy of her, and while he is gone, Zelendine falls into an enchanted sleep. Troilus finds her and rescues her after waking her up with a kiss. Then they conceive, and when their child is born, the child draws from her finger the flax that caused her sleep. She realizes from the ring Troilus left her that he was the father of the child. So she woke up during that point. So Troilus later returns and marries her. So basically, you have someone who's so stricken with grief, isn't sure if she's alive or dead, is getting sent off to war, basically. And in his grief is, does something very wrong, but in the end returns and makes everything right. And she comes back, she's resurrected through her child, right? It talks about in the Bible, you shall be saved through childbearing. Right. So this actually has a whole lot, man. It doesn't have anything with the mother and all that other stuff that came in later. So this is a very, very basic story, comparatively speaking. And there's, all kinds of other elements to it. It's hard to find. I was not able to find it to actually read it myself, a translation of it. And there's very little about it, outside of critiques of the like in-depth synopsis of all the different tales in the whole thing. So going off of not just Wikipedia, but other sources on this one, I really had to dig deep to find much on it, but it does exist. It is a thing. And it's very clear that they were bound to Christian ideals about sexuality, even though it was a sordid story, as opposed to later versions where they kind of just went all kinds of crazy with it. That being said, if you guys don't mind, why don't we open up to questions and thoughts at this point? Now that I've brought all this together, we have the Disney version And then I can get to my conclusions on this whole thing, because I think there are conclusions to be made that are not Freudian, that are actually helpful. But thoughts, questions? You can see why this is embarrassing to you can see why this is embarrassing to the fairy tale community and whatever else, right? Like the fairy tale scholars.
Oh, I mean, yeah and no.
There's worse. There's worse.
Historical. There's worse. There's weirder. They're not necessarily like ew, gross, or oh, that's bad, but just weird. Honestly, what I'm more interested in is the changes and deviations made by Disney. That's what I'm more interested in.
Yeah.
None of like the closest thing to a Maleficent that you have is the either evil mother or evil wife, but neither of them are actually a Maleficent.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so what do you got here? You've got you have the original tale. I say the original tale. You have the Arthurian tale, or Arthurian epic saga French tale that has the kiss, the true love's kiss,
the flax,
the conception, the sleep. But it still has, wrapped in that, like you said, it's wrapped in that Christian tradition. You have the other variants that go off the metaphoric deep end, as it were. If you say that, I haven't read them, if you say that it's very clear she's dead, then I'll accept that. Or if
for
they're
Basile,
doing okay. But you still get that element, and then you've got the second half, which is sort of a Cinderella-esque story, but not really. Part of it is I'm just interested in how much overlap between the stories, how there are tropes in fairy tales, right?
Yes.
That's just interesting. But what does Disney bring into the equation? What does he do? Okay, so he's got the same baseline. You've got the girl who's asleep. You've got the guy who wakes her up. That's the core, for lack of a better term, two characters, right? Whatever they are.
And the spinning wheel.
And the spinning wheel. But the spinning wheel, she just touches it and pricks her finger and falls down. I don't think it's meant she gets some flax.
Right. But it's all connected.
Right?
Yeah, it's flax, spinning wheel, the whole thing. Yeah. So yeah, I'm with you. But yeah, that's those. Yeah.
So what then does he add? He adds the good fairies, and he adds Maleficent. He adds, to a certain degree, a level of enchantment. Now, everyone here knows I'm pro-enchantment. I'm very much pro-enchantment. I find it interesting that this is how he chooses to do it, but whatever. And especially, more importantly, I find it interesting that the fairy tales, which have the word fairy in them, don't mention fairies.
Yeah.
But whatever.
Yeah.
That's just an interesting little tidbit there. What does he add? He adds... So then, if that's the case, obviously the characters are characters. The villain is villain. I'm not taking them away. I'm not trying to say that these characters are Aslan and they are meant to represent something specific. But I don't think it would be too much of a stretch to say that Maleficent is representative of evil, period.
Right.
She is. She says all the powers of hell. She calls herself the mistress of evil. She says that she works for the forces of evil, or that they're the forces of all evil. You're right. Yeah. So there's all this evil involved. She is evil personified in a sense, and so Philip
she's
is
Lilith.
fighting Lilith or whatever.
Yeah.
But that doesn't particularly matter, because if she is evil, then Philip is fighting evil. Is he fighting do we want to go all English major and say he's fighting the evil within himself so that he doesn't do necrophilia? Or are we just saying that he's a good guy and he does what good people do, and that is to not just promote the good by bringing her back to life, but to destroy evil, right? There's that element. But there's also the good fairies. So not only is there an evil force that is the personification of evil that is very powerful, but there are also a good force that can do good things.
Right.
I think my computer's freezing again.
It is.
Yep, looks like it.
Is he gone?
The goblins have attacked again. So when, kind of going off of that, when was the evil fairy aspect introduced? Is that something from Disney, or is that something that was in the stories before that?
There are variations where, I don't remember which one specifically. I think Grimm had a yes, Grimm has a not necessarily evil fairy, but a fairy who was forgotten and was upset that she was forgotten, and put a curse on the child because of that. That does exist, and that is in the Grimm version, and I'll mention that when Brendan gets back. I'm sure he's dealing with resetting the computer entirely.
Hey,
you back?
This is a new computer. I'm mad.
I hear that.
What type of computer is it?
I don't remember. All it's got is a giant N. It's a Nitro. It's not an Apple.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, when you were gone, he asked if there was any connection whatsoever to Maleficent, and there was in the Grimm version. Instead of like there came, I'm pretty sure it was Grimm version. There was a fairy who was forgotten when they brought and it wasn't fairies, it was like wise people, whatever, but they forgot someone, and that someone came and was upset that they were forgotten, and essentially like cast their little spell, for the flax situation. And like that happened, but she never comes back. It's not like that's, whatever.
So
yeah.
So the Disney was just adding something whole cloth that hadn't been in the story with adding the fairy element to it.
Yes, the fairy part is all added. They had like wise people, wizards, kind of a thing previous.
Yeah.
But yes, they added fairies, and they added all of the aesthetic of the mistress of all evil. So yeah. The dragon, all that jazz. So
anyway, yeah, I just find that interesting what Walt chose to add.
Yep.
And I don't necessarily mind that, because I do think it kind of creates a nice little, makes the story a nice, better package. It's much easier when you have a villain to hate to, enjoy a story. So there you go.
And it's a lot easier to show it to children whenever the villain is not trying to actively murder children and feed them to their spouse.
Yes.
That's just one that's not going to go over well in the 50s Christian community. It's just not.
And this is why to this day we still have, body autonomy people getting mad about this movie. Even though it's
in all
stupid.
Fairness, the bodily autonomy people get mad about literally everything.
They get mad when you change your child's diaper. Anyway, so
oh my word. As the oldest child of 8, I can personally guarantee you that the person who wrote that article has never had a child.
Yep.
Yes.
Personally guarantee.
Truth.
Okay, so I'll go ahead and bring this home on my thoughts. Okay, so I wrote this to TK because I was bouncing the ideas off her. She was really helpful in talking about it a little bit further, and just having someone to bounce it off of, because I didn't want to talk to you guys because I wanted to save it for this. But
what, you a verbal processor? No, say it isn't so.
But this is what I came to. So I was trying specifically, like I have with Ruth and Cinderella, trying to tie it to something. I'll do the whole little back and forth that I have with her. I said I've been doing a deep dive into Sleeping Beauty for Poets at War. I've done a deep dive before, and I feel like I'm closer to cracking the nut, so to speak, but I wanted your input. Keep in mind, I'm talking to TK in this. I said, in all the variants, I see the theme of feminine fertility and beauty broken and then reawakened. I also see themes of how improper use of the power within feminine beauty leads to trouble for everyone. I even see mankind dead, asleep in their trespasses and sins due to an unforeseen fall, and the prince coming to save his bride, the church. But I really feel like I'm missing something overall. Your thoughts? She kind of said, yeah, they're really messed up, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And there's some stuff, weird little tangents into, she said, other than weird little tangents into the customs and laws of fairies, I haven't really delved a whole lot deeper. But yeah, I said, but I came back, and I said that, she said, this one's really complicated. I wish I could lend you some books. I said, I have some sources too. Basically mine comes down to this. And this is my overall statement. Substitutionary atonement is one of the most embarrassing, in quotes, doctrines in all of Scripture, at least to the high-minded. I think that the same reason people balk at, this is the same reason people balk at Sleeping Beauty, the variations that we were talking about. I think the prince is Adam, who falls into despair at the fall of his wife, Eve, and impregnates her with the seed that will one day save them all. And in Disney's version, they make the prince Christ instead of Adam and Aurora the church, and we get the same story that we did in Snow White with different ballet and artsy trappings. So basically, I think that he took away the shame. I think there's also I said, as for the second half with the ogre mom, I think this is a picture of the persecution of the church redeemed. So the church gets redeemed, and then it actually has to deal with the world, its family relations, etc., etc. There's connections to things like Rahab and Tamar and anywhere else in the scripture, Esther, where we see women that have all kinds of crazy, ridiculous stories because beauty is valued and it is highly prized and it is also abused and it's tossed about in the wind. And we get the same thing with Eve. Eve gets deceived by the serpent, and Adam does not save her, but we have the promise, the child, of the future savior, the one who sucked the flax from her finger and resurrect her, right? So I think that's what the Arthurian thing was trying to do. I'm not talking that like Basile was trying to do that or anything of that nature. Mm-hmm. But I do think that this is the reason the story has stuck around. What it is ultimately in the leaf mold of the mind of the author is getting at is this isn't just don't have sex before marriage. It's actually a full-blown, trying to be a full-blown picture of feminine beauty and sexuality and the volatility and power that is actually there in the creation, not just like in some Freudian sense, right? But actually the way the real power that God gave to women by being the portals through which all of us come. It's a lot more complicated than any of the others that I've come through so far, but that's the best I can do. Not satisfied? Me either, not fully.
Okay.
For one thing,
Go. You go.
For one thing, I don't think that they're like. Well, one, I'm very nervous about looking for. I joke about being an English teacher. I don't like doing that.
Sure.
There's a reason why I joke about it. I don't want to go looking for stories and parallels and things where there aren't any.
I'm not saying active either. I'm saying that this is like Tolkien would say, in the leaf mold of the mind of the author. Not actually like on the surface this is what they're trying to do. I'm not presuming on their intentions. So go ahead.
Right, but that's the thing. God is the creator of the universe and the author of the universe and the author of the story. Any story we come up is, if to pardon my use of Platonic theory of forms, is but a shadow of the story that he already wrote. Mm-hmm. I can sit here with the way the story is saying, and I can point to Sarah. Was it Sarah and the concubine who was making fun of Sarah?
Hagar.
Yeah. I can point to that and try to draw connections. We can point to Bathsheba and trying to draw connections.
Rachel and Leah.
Can point to Yeah, Leah, we could point to a bunch of different people and try to draw connections there. I think that you might be onto something, but I don't think but again, it's not necessarily like in the leaf mold of the mind, or it's not necessarily something that they're thinking of doing. It's more has to do, this is the human experience that people have seen. This is something that is a element. So when we craft our story, we're going to do it subconsciously.
Right. I'm basically saying if stories are a chord, like in music theory, and you can do chords with a whole bunch of different notes. You can do, several extra octaves added in. But it's still the same chord, right? You can do all kinds of different things with a chord, and it can still be the same chord. I'm saying the closest chord structure that I have to of a universal chord structure that I have to Sleeping Beauty, to make any sense of it, is Adam and Eve, like I mentioned. So
I like your analogy of the chord because I'm going to make it worse.
Oh boy.
Here's the thing about a chord.
Mm-hmm.
A chord changes function based on the key signature that you're in.
Yep.
The G chord is the root chord in the G scale.
Right.
The G chord is the fifth chord in the C scale.
Yep.
So you can have the same story and have it serve two functions.
Yes.
So yeah, you can say that that this chord is close to Adam and Eve, but this chord also might be close to Hagar and Sarah.
Right.
From a different key signature.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yep.
So.
Yep. I completely agree with you.
Alex is like, I don't know if I like this.
I
am unsure.
Go ahead, Alex.
I'm still trying to formulate thoughts, man.
Yeah, that's the problem. That's the problem with Joshua. He throws out like a line, and we have to sit here and come up with a response to it. And it's like, I need like 5 minutes to process what you just said.
Yeah.
But
okay, so
go.
Let me go ahead and make a play for those 5 minutes. What would you say to the people who are most definitely not listening to us right now, but whose, kids might show them this video, who say, you're reading way too much into it. It doesn't mean any of that. It's just a story. Those type of people.
Honestly, those people I would say,
stories
okay.
don't mean things.
Honestly, those people I would say, okay. I'm not gonna. I'm not
5-minute play didn't work.
Well, let me say this: I'm not gonna I'm not gonna die on the hill of Sleeping Beauty is connected to Adam and Eve. I am a lot closer to dying on the hill that Ruth and Cinderella are tied together.
Oh yeah,
because I think there is actual intentional telephone gaming going on throughout the years.
Oh yeah,
and Brendan's shaking his head. But I would consider fighting on that hill.
I'm with you on Ruth. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So, but this one, it's not worth it. It's not worth it with folk that already just think everything is surface level. This kind of talk is for people who are trying to find the related chords, to use our metaphor, right? These are for people who are, and you say, what is that useful for? Well, it's useful for music theory, so to speak, right? This is useful for story theory and story structure and archetypes and understanding how things connect.
Term?
Yes. So they say story structure usually, but story theory is a real thing too. Like I consider it a little bit broader than story structure alone, but a lot of people just kind of lump it into the umbrella term story structure. So
okay, I just never heard that term before.
Well, if music theory is the study of music to understand how it works so that you can make better music, story theory would be the study of story to understand how it works to make better stories.
I've heard people use narrative theory, but I feel like that's too academic because there's
because it is.
Yes, exactly.
No,
So
I
yeah.
understand. I understood how it was being used. I just never heard the term before, and I like it. So I was
Right.
wondering if it was like an officially accepted term.
I've
or
heard
if it's
people
something
use
It is
it.
now.
Came up with. It's
Yeah.
good. It is now. Yes, we are official. We officially put our stamp on this theory.
But
on this term.
So
Poets at War recognized.
This is a scary look into the scary things that go through my mind when analyzing the various fairy tales and all kinds of other things. This is like you were joking about the English teachers and whatever else, and analyzing and finding themes. There's an academic nature to that kind of thing that is unhelpful, and then there is actually practicing. Like, I'm not an academic. I have a GED. Like, I never did any further education formally. But the fact is, like, me doing this is actually for my craft. It is not just for my story craft, but for my apologetic craft. Because in apologetics, knowing how things connect and rhetoric, right? Like arguing all these other sorts of things, like this is where this matters, Alex. And if I really wanted to talk to someone who is in earnest and asking me, why does this matter? I would tell them, because this is rhetoric, and it is understanding how things are constructed and connected in ways that people don't readily notice. This is the plumbing under your house, right? You don't get water without this.
Oh, okay. Running that through the trivium, grammar, logic, rhetoric.
Right.
Is this rhetoric or is this logic?
Both.
And then story theory is grammar.
It's all of it.
Story theory is grammar. What are all the parts? Then this is how they are working together. And then rhetoric is actually building the story, right?
Yes, but also building the argument, if depending on how you use what you already got, right? So in the vein of plumbing, you have water that you have to tame, right? And you have to tame it through both the physicality of the pipes and the design of the pipes. And then you actually get it out at the other end as the rhetoric, as the argument, as the story, whatever else.
As a person who occasionally does plumbing stuff for my job, I am now going to officially use I am taming water every time I am doing that.
That's right. Just like smoking a pipe is taming fire. So, yep.
So to tie this back to an earlier Poets at War.
Yeah.
You're asking sort of a question, and you're trying to tie it back to a biblical story.
The reason. Okay, you want to know my reasoning for that?
No, I want to put another phrase on it.
Okay.
I think why tie it back to a biblical story? Because God's story is the story, and so if you can tie you can tie theoretically any story back to God's story. I get it. I get that.
Any story with real resonance. You can tell a story of me going to the supermarket and it has a beginning, middle, and end, and it not be true, good, and beautiful, right? Yeah. So but
right. No. I get that.
Yeah.
What I'm thinking about is what we asked in the Snow White episode that I'm still absolutely like jazzed that we fleshed this out. What is the core of the story?
Right.
Right. I think you are trying in going after the Adam and Eve parallel, in going after this, you are trying to find what is the core of Sleeping Beauty.
Yep.
What is the thing that if you remove that element from it, you remove everything.
Right.
And I think Sleeping Beauty is much more of a romance than it is anything else. What I mean by that is if Christ loves the church and is able to save her out of it, that is what I mean by the romance, right? It's maybe not romance, maybe it's love, maybe it's
it's a love story. Yeah.
It is a love story. That core of someone falls and it is love that pulls them out.
Mm-hmm.
And that falling, whether or not it's her fault, whatever, whether or
Right.
not it's a curse, whatever. Interestingly enough, with Adam and Eve, something that I heard recently, Eve took the apple first, but the sin wasn't committed until Adam ate.
Right.
Yeah, federal headship.
Yeah, exactly. That's usually where that goes. But in this case, like, it's from then on, it's like when I was born, I had not technically committed a sin, but I was still sinful because of original sin.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That was sort of imposed upon me in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to get into the theology. Don't fight me. Go argue with Dad, not me. He's the person who's smart. But with Maleficent cursing Aurora, I'm going with Disney here, not the original.
I know you are. It's fine. It's fine.
Maleficent cursing Aurora, that could be like the original sin, and the prince coming in as Christ and saving her from that. Why does he do it? Because he loves.
Right.
I think that works.
Yes, for Disney.
Why does she chase for Disney's? Yes. Why does she chase after him when she meets him? Because she has seen the bridegroom and loves him and wants to be with him. And
right. And I think that
it's like,
they
what's
did
everyone
that.
Else doing? Whatever.
They did that in Snow White, and I think Disney wanted to bring a lot of that back in Sleeping Beauty and do it in a more overt sense with the dragon, and all this other kind of stuff. Because because the dragon wasn't in any of the other variants. That's very obvious. So I think there was a large mixture of Freudianism and Christianity in Disney's Sleeping Beauty, and I think Christianity ultimately wins out in the story. So I think I mentioned, I said as for the second half, no, excuse me, I did say in my version, I think Disney's version, that they basically said that's too complicated a story, which it is, to try and do in a fairy tale. It's why the others kind of fail in a lot of ways. I'd argue that they lasted well enough because I think there are three things that really work in all variants. I'm going to exclude Disney for a second just for the one in particular, but you have because Disney took 2 out of 3, well, 2.5 out of 3, let's put it that way. Like you were saying earlier, there is the fall and the curse, and then the kiss. Those are the two things that Disney took whole cloth. And then the half is actually a function of the spinning wheel more than it is of the child. But by not having the child, you make it about Prince Philip is the Christ, the saving factor. Whereas the savior in the other variants is always the child, right? So this is pre-Christ in the other versions, which ultimately would go back to Adam and Eve. There are other variants, like you were saying, Hagar, Tamar, I would argue, is really close to this kind of situation with all the sexual stuff and whatever else, and so you've got all these things. You've got Esther, which you've got basically the king would be like the ogre kind of situation. He's going to eat up your people, and Haman, right? And all that other stuff. So there's tons of other connections that work really well with it too. But I think the reason I go with Adam and Eve is because we're sort of ad fontes, right? I think that's what the phrase is in Latin, going back to the source, right? And I think the core source is Adam and Eve and the proto-evangelion, right? The prophecy of the coming savior.
Sure.
So
yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, I didn't mean to completely bypass all the other versions, but
right.
The one I know the best and the one I'm saying here from is the Disney version.
Right.
The core of the fairy tales, I'm not sure how you parse that out. Partly because of that weird, you've got two stories in one.
Which my whole thing with the second story is, I really do think that this is a story that does exist in fairy tales, it's not as common as it used to be, and I think that's because Christianity has become so prevalent throughout the entire world. It's actually more common in Muslim circles nowadays, but it's basically the story of the evil. I mean, we get the evil stepmother kind of thing, so that's kind of our last remnant of it, but it is the evil in-laws, basically. How do you deal with, you Romeo and Juliet, you've got all these other sorts of things like that. And so I think this was always kind of meant to be two stories and just ended up getting packaged as one. But anyway.
Well, yeah. And the second half, it's the core of it is Psalm 37.
Yep.
The wicked raises their sword against the righteous and bends their bow against them.
Yep.
They will be killed with their own sword.
Yep.
And their bow will be shattered.
Yep, exactly.
It's if you try to do evil to good people, your evil will be visited upon you. Mm-hmm. Or if you want to, I would argue like Esther and Haman. What did Haman do? He built a gallows. What happened? He got hung from the gallows that he had built. That is very one for one.
Impaled.
Mm-hmm. And who says God doesn't like poetry and irony?
Thank you. One of my favorite lines from that movie.
Great line.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I think here's probably a good place to wrap this episode, and you and I can, you and us can talk a little bit more. I know people got to get rolling soon, but anyway, people, be your family's bard. Do not turn to the right or to the left, and the Lord will be with you wherever you go. Keep searching through the trenches for stuff like this, for the core of these stories that have lasted forever. It is worth it. You will find things and amazing weapons that you never knew you had at your disposal. Yeah, we'll see you next time in the trenches on Poets at War.
Sunset warrior bard, the world betray thee once more.